Today I'm in Tilton, Illinois with Heather and Boyd. Heather, Boyd, thank you so much
for
joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Tell our listeners where they can find you online.
We're Vineyard Accounting. We're at vineyardaccounting.net.
We're on LinkedIn. I mean, if you need to find us, just Google Vineyard Accounting, and every place we are, you'll find us. There is, as far as I know, not another Vineyard Accounting out there. So.
Perfect. Yeah, or check out the podcast description, folks. I'll have direct links if you just want to click and go there if that's easier for you. That's the way to do it. Once again, we're in Molly's Joint right now in Tilton, Illinois. Shout out to the 1937
Love
group.
this place. Love coming over here. It's great to have such an open consumption venue this close to us here in Central Illinois. Ambrose and Alex and Sonia have done a fantastic job with this facility, and with this new outdoor space, it's going to be something this summer. We're really excited.
Straight up. And folks, if you go back and check it out, I'll have a link to this as well. I was invited to the grand opening. This is the second podcast I've recorded, but we recorded the first podcast in Molly's Joint. And this place, let me just say, feels like what I expected legalization to be. Mm-hmm. Isn't that a fair?
Yes.
It's like
yes.
Smoke openly. You can have a drink. You can get some food. You can buy some weed.
Play Mario Kart on the big screen.
The Xbox and Nintendo back there. It's awesome. So, folks, real quick, you're tuned into the Cole Memo. I'm your host, Cole Preston. Every episode is released in audio, video, and transcript format. To find the transcript, audio, or video version of any episode, please just refer to the description of the episode that you're listening to now. Within that description, you can find a link that will take you to our website, which will display the transcript for this episode and the platforms where you can find this episode in audio or video formats. If you're unable to locate the episode description on whichever platform you're listening from, I get it. The platforms change all the time. Simply take note of the episode number and visit thecolememo.com. From there, you can use our search functionality in the top right-hand corner to find the corresponding episode, and then you'll be able to access the audio, video, and transcript version of that episode. You might also find any links that we referenced during the episode so that you can connect with people like Boyd and Heather from Vineyard Accounting. If you're not listening to this episode of the Cole Memo on Patreon, then you're listening to this episode a bit later than our patrons. To become a patron, go to thecolememo.com/Patreon. It's a great way to support our show. Another way to support our show is at thecolememo.com/support. It costs a lot to do this show between traveling, equipment, and everything else, hosting fees, you name it. This show is brought to you by listeners like you. So if you're able to support us, go to thecolememo.com/support. Before we get into it, I just want to say one of the best ways to support the show is just to simply share it with your friends, subscribe to or follow our show, like it, tell your best friend about it. All of that stuff makes a huge difference. Today is Friday, June 7th, just a little bit after the fine hour of 4:20. And once again, I'm sitting down with Boyd and Heather. Okay, cannabis and money. I just want to start with what do you guys do first? I mean, it sounds very straightforward, accounting, but like you specialize in cannabis accounting. Is that?
Heather's the accountant. I always like to say at Vineyard Accounting, Heather counts your dough, I run the show. And Heather is the accountant in the operation. And she's been doing accounting and taxes.
More than 10 years. I don't remember when I actually first started in it, but I've got a background, a wide background, bachelor's in accounting, master's in forensic accounting. I have always liked tax returns. They're just a really big puzzle that are fun to figure out. Boyd thinks I'm a little crazy on that aspect, but taxes have always been fun and interesting to me, and then I kind of parlayed into all of the other things that go along with accounting.
Yeah, tax returns are something that I just like haphazardly do as the due date approaches, and I'm like calling my aunt who's an accountant. I'm like, I don't want to get a call from the IRS.
Right.
It's so stressful. I could just, before we get into everything, I know that it creates jobs for people like you, so I'm not trying to argue you out of a job. I just hate how we do taxes because it's like, I feel like this is not even, I feel like this is a cliche joke almost. if you do your taxes wrong, you'll get a call right away. But they expect you to do your taxes. So it's like, you guys obviously know what I owe if I'm going to get in trouble.
Right.
In high school, they don't teach you how to change a tire. They don't teach you how to change your oil. They don't teach you how to do your taxes. But the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's the old joke. So they taught us that. But
right. They don't teach you really about savings, anything
Right.
else like that. Yeah.
But Heather's been an accountant for a number of years. When adult rec use came online in Illinois, we saw it as an opportunity to enter into this new industry and parlay or put to good use, I should say, our skill sets to service this industry. And it has been an education for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We learned something even now. We're 4 years in? And we still learn something new every day on the cannabis side. I joke about, you can have run any other kind of business successfully and you get into cannabis and you don't know what you don't know. It works different than any other industry out there. And it's a new learning curve every day, and things change. I mean, it's also an environment that, what is a fact today may or may not be how it works tomorrow. So we have to keep on top of all of that, all of those changing things as well.
We came to cannabis through an unusual path. I always tell when you meet somebody in cannabis our age, this is generally not their first career. This is absolutely my third or fourth. Same with Heather. We come from 25 years of grape cultivation. We actually do own a vineyard.
I was going to say, there's the vineyard.
Yes.
There's the vineyard.
Back in 1997, my parents both worked for the state of Illinois, down in southern Illinois, and they decided they were getting ready to retire. And my dad needed a way to get out of the house and not drive my mom crazy, so they bought a farm. And in 1998, we planted our first crop of grapes, and in 1999, we planted our second. And for 25 years, we grew grapes in southern Illinois for the Illinois wine industry. Just cultivators, just growers. We didn't have a winery. I didn't want the headache of having a liquor license and worrying about insurance and booking a band and people that want to have a wedding. I just wanted to be a farmer. And so for 25 years, we grew grapes and sold them to a number of wineries, and we were pretty good at it. We won some awards. Wines that were made from our grapes won Best in Show at the Illinois State Fair more than once. And it was interesting because it wasn't until we had gotten into cannabis that we realized that there are a lot of parallels between these two industries. Illinois had a grape and wine industry back pre-prohibition. It kind of floundered for many, many decades, and then it kind of saw a resurgence in the 80s and the 90s. And that's when my family got involved in it. And over the course of our years of growing grapes and selling grapes to the winemakers, we belonged to an association, a statewide association. My father was actually president of that association for a couple of years. And it was during that time that I discovered that the California wine industry spends more money on lobbying in the state of Illinois than the entire state of Illinois wine industry earns in a year.
Wow.
So think about that.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because Chicago is the number one wine consumption city in the world. In the world, Chicago consumes more wine per capita than Paris, Rome, places that you would think would be number one, Chicago. And it's such a valuable market. The California wine industry in the early days of the Illinois wine industry was so threatened by this home state market that they were out. I mean, Illinois wine industry wasn't spending any money on lobbyists because they didn't have any money to spend. California was spending money on lobbyists in Springfield to keep the Illinois wine industry down. And if you fast forward 20 years and you replace California wine industry with MSOs and small cultivators with, small cultivators in cannabis, there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
And how the paths of these two industries have moved forward in the state and the challenges that both industries have faced and continue to face.
Yeah. That's a perspective that, speaking of learning
Nothing
things,
surprises.
I'm learning.
Nothing
Right,
surprises
right,
us when it
right.
comes to agriculture, taxation, regulation,
Mhm.
market share, institutional bureaucracy that is required. With grape and wine, it's going through the liquor distributors. Everything has to go through the liquor
Mhm.
distributors so that they get their cut.
Right.
And that's where the point of lobbying is.
Mhm.
is that's who controls, the volume and who orders and everything else. And it's just like a small cultivator trying to get their product on a shelf in a big dispensary.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very
Yep.
similar.
Wow, that's interesting. I the only thing that I think I was aware of that you just touched on that I was kind of familiar. I remember when Las Vegas first launched their market, and the distributors, the alcohol distributors, fought their way into being the only cannabis distributors. And it was very interesting in cases sort of like this, where it's a little bit different. But you've kind of got all this on one property.
Mm-hmm.
In Vegas, there was this situation where it was the dispensary was on the property and the cultivation was on the property. So literally the alcohol guy had to come in, take a pallet, wheel it down the hallway.
Mhm.
And it was like some Vice report that I recall seeing.
Yeah.
Nevada, home of casinos, impulse weddings, legal brothels, and as of July 1st, recreational marijuana.
If you're wondering, did they just say legal brothels? Yes, you heard that right. I actually traveled out to a legal brothel, spoke to several licensed legal sex workers in a series that I produced. You can check it out at thecolememo.com/sex.
The truth is, the state has never been anything close to a free market paradise. Everything from the Las Vegas taxi industry to prostitution is controlled by a handful of politically connected companies licensed to operate by the government. This means exorbitant prices and unnecessary hassles for customers and businesses. The latest industry to take hold here, legal weed, is no exception. Governor Brian Sandoval recently declared a state of emergency because Nevada's 37 licensed marijuana shops are running out of inventory. How could that be? The law legalizing weed in Nevada also granted an 18-month monopoly on distribution to liquor companies. Not only do alcohol wholesalers lack the experience or infrastructure to transport marijuana, most are too afraid to even enter the market because they're regulated by the federal government and marijuana is still considered illegal on the federal level.
And there isn't a shortage of cannabis as much as there is a shortage of distributors.
Armin Yemenijan, the owner of Essence, a marijuana dispensary just north of the Vegas Strip, started out running a facility for medical marijuana, which was legalized in Nevada back in 2015. When he was dealing with medical cannabis, his employees simply moved inventory from the grow house to the storefront themselves. Now that Essence is selling recreational marijuana, that's no longer an option.
Our cultivation facility is no more than a couple miles from our dispensary. Even worse, there are some cultivations that are in the same building as the dispensaries.
But to your point, it's interesting how there are a lot of parallels to how these industries
Highly taxed, highly regulated, specialized agriculture product that is, I'm sure, I know for a fact, is out earning everything but corn and soybeans. So,
yeah, that's crazy. So we're going to talk obviously about, so you mentioned earlier that, things can kind of change day by day. And one thing that may change in the future is rescheduling. But
Yeah, that'll be big.
actually, before we talk taxes and everything else and get into all of the finance stuff, I just wanted to give a little bit more space to the people that are hosting this conversation really quick. And I also you said you might have some stories to tell. So I thought maybe this is a good time.
you want to go ahead? We were up in Nican. We were up in Schaumburg over the weekend for the convention. This was the fourth one, and we've been to all four. This was it was a great conference. We love going up and seeing all of our Chicago cannabis.
And just for
friends.
folks that may be tuning in later and didn't catch it out, you said it's a cannabis conference.
Cannabis
Cannabis
conference,
conference.
Midwest Cannabis Conference, Chicago Cannabis Convention, whatever. It's goes by many names, but it's nice because after having gone for so many years, we see so many friends, we see so many people that we know. We were very pleasantly, I want to say entertained, educated, informed by a number of different panels. But 1937 group, on Friday at the conference, the keynote was given by Jim Belushi. And on Saturday, the keynote was given by Ambrose Jackson, who shared
his journey.
Yes, many details about his journey and stories I'd never heard for sure. And it was very emotional. It was very moving. But, everyone, Alex, Jim, Sonia, everyone from 1937 had a session that they led. I learned probably more in the session about the actual building of this facility.
Yeah.
And the different challenges and hurdles they went through and how they wanted to make it what it is.
Yeah.
And, that was very, very educational, but, good conference.
Very different this year. Very, focused on craft growers. We've been to 4 of them. In fact, on the drive over, we were talking about how different the first one was compared to this one. The last 2 years have been in Schaumburg. Good facility. But this year was very focused on the craft growers. There were not a lot of, there were fewer ancillary businesses in the expo. There were fewer big brands in the expo. It was very aimed towards the craft grow, a lot of social equity information and sessions. You could just kind of see a pivot in the programming and in the setup of it. So it was
both on the trade floor, and the MSOs kind of sat it out. I think I didn't see the presence of the big brands.
Oh, really?
Both on the trade show floor.
See, what I thought was just because, what I thought you were saying, because I had heard a few other people say something similar. They were like, there was a lot of craft growers there. And I thought, well, in the past, there just weren't any open. So now that they're open, it's like, okay.
Right. I think they showcased those efforts of the people who are finally turning that corner. They get into that tipping point where they've managed to get their financing. They've got their capital raise done, their branding, their packaging. We talked to some people that we know up there. Reese Xavier from HT23, he was there showing his new brand. The event that Madeline and High Focus Media hosted on Friday night was very specific to the smaller licensees, to the equity licensees, to the craft growers.
And the newer brands.
And they were the companies that were represented at that event. And that was noticeable. So.
Yeah. Well, got to give a shout out to High Focus Media as well. So folks, check out High Focus Media and ICA. They're doing a lot of things for consumers, including trying to make, I think, things like this more normal.
Well, they had the opening panel, ICA and High Focus Media and Phil,
High-Minded Events.
Phil from High-Minded. They had the opening panel, very informative
Yes.
about, consumption spaces and wanting to do more events.
And the reality of putting together consumption events. What, how do you do that? What hurdles do you have to overcome to make those happen? And, just the intricacies of it, the ins and outs, the formalities, all of that kind of stuff. So it was a very, very interesting, very informative panel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's almost a whole episode in and of itself.
Well,
At this point, I've recorded several episodes on the topic of cannabis consumption lounges at actual cannabis consumption lounges. I've even sat down with the faces behind High-Minded Events, who host cannabis consumption events across the state of Illinois. If you'd like to see those episodes, go to thecolmemo.com/IL consumption. That link will be in the podcast description.
A lot of hemp people, too.
Yes.
A lot of
There
hemp
was
people there looking for answers, wanting to know what's going to happen to my business when the new Farm Bill comes out.
Yeah, and I mean, just saying, there's hemp drinks for sale over there. There's hemp ice cream for sale over there. I'm drinking a hemp drink from actually a social equity licensee. So these people have a social equity license, just like 1937 group, River Bluff Collective.
Yeah.
We know DJ.
We know DJ, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
good guys.
Yep.
Good guys. And tasty drinks. I got to say, if you want any, I've got more for you. So just holler at me. And I've also got smokes here. So, but of course we've got a lot of finance stuff to talk about as well, but I wanted to give more room to give shout outs to awesome people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So got to support each other. And I am thankful that they just allowed us, like, hey, can we smoke and stuff here? And they're like, sure, come on down, so shout out to them.
Yeah. Very nice venue.
Yeah. And there needs to be 50 more of them across the state.
Yeah, because if I didn't make it more clear, as I alluded to earlier, this is not the first time I've been here, but so if you want to check out the episode where we kind of talk on day one, but if it's not clear, we are at a consumption lounge right now. Next door within the same complex is a dispensary, and also within the same complex is a bar, restaurant, and gaming lounge.
Yeah, and the restaurant, they got new burgers on the menu. We've got inside information.
Yes.
There's new burgers on the
Yes.
menu here. You got to come down and try them out.
Yeah, I tried the wings last time and I was blown away. I was blown away by how delicious they were. So, I mean, if you're trying to, like I say, enjoy what I think legalization should be, what we all expected it to be, a good place to stop is in Molly's Joint, and hopefully through the efforts of the folks we mentioned, we'll see more of that.
Yep.
So,
I
Yep.
hope so.
Hope so. Yes.
well, I was talking about changes that may come at a federal level, but let's talk first. Do you agree? Maybe we'll talk first about changes that just happened at the state level, like last session, and how that has impacted. Before we even talk it going away, let's talk about 280E and what it is and what
Sure.
makes cannabis businesses, frankly, harder to operate. Am I wrong to say that?
No, that's very true. So 280E is a section in the IRS code, and it's very short. It's one sentence, and the basic premise of it is if you are trafficking illicit drugs, you do not have the benefit of any deductions or credits.
What?
Right.
Yeah.
So you pay a lot of taxes. I mean,
Yeah.
some say up to 60%, a lot more than you would in any other business in this environment. Depending on, there are other businesses that 280E applies to as well, but cannabis is the interesting one because states have legalized. So there are license holders and there are more and more entrepreneurs and businesses open in this area that are subject to 280E. So if we think of what does that look like on a profit and loss statement, all of the things like payroll, rent, marketing, your equipment, insurance, none of those things are deductible. So you pay taxes on your gross revenue minus your cost of goods sold. So that's the number that you pay taxes on. You don't get to take any of those other deductions or credits.
And if I could put it, because I just learned, I know I'm probably too old to have just learned about this, but I just learned what deductions were within like the last year. So can I put it like, let's say that I was running a business right now. This podcast isn't, it's just kind of like a hobby, but let's say it's a business called the Cole Memo, and I travel to a conference and I get some meals and I stay in a hotel. The idea is, right, that I can save those receipts and at the end of the year, deduct those
business-related
figures,
expenses.
Business-related expenses from my taxes.
Yes, correct.
Gotcha. And the real impact, and this is how I learned about it, was I owed a bunch of taxes. I was like, wait a minute. And so I talked to, like I say, my accountant, and they're like, oh, wait, you've been spending a lot of money on this. Let's
Right.
total that
Times your
up, do
deductions.
some deductions.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden I'm getting money back.
Right.
I wanted to break that down for laymen because honestly, for the longest time I've been hearing about this and they're like, well, we can't do deductions and all this stuff. And it just goes right over just a consumer's head,
Right.
frankly.
Right.
Yeah, if you owned a bakery, flour, sugar, milk, your employees, your advertising.
Flour, sugar, and milk are part of your cost of goods sold. So you would still get to deduct that. That is the equivalent in the cannabis space. But the non-equivalent is your employees, your payroll, your insurance, your rent, any other expense relating to running a business in the cannabis space is a wash as far as federal tax is concerned. That's what 280E, that's how 280E impacts people. And that's why it's so hard to make it in this environment, because you have such a burden, a large tax burden.
Gotcha.
There's just nothing left over at the end.
Right. Margins are thin. And with that much tax, margins get really thin.
Mm-hmm. And not to pop quiz you, but I just thought of this. Isn't 280E and like the real like source of it even becoming a part of the code Al Capone, and he like trying to write off stuff in his old alcohol business? Or is that just something?
I think I found the information that I was referring to in the conversation. I'll paste this full article in the show notes, but I'm displaying it on my screen right now. The IRS rarely used the public policy exception to deny deductions. Then in walks Jeff Edmondson. Jeff Edmondson was convicted on drug charges and went to prison in 1974. However, Mr. Edmondson had learned the lesson of Al Capone, that the real prison time is for tax evasion. So, Mr. Edmondson dutifully filed his federal tax returns declaring his drug trafficking income. He also took all his lawful business deductions for his drug dealing business. The IRS attempted to deny the deductions based upon public policy exception, but failed in tax court. Edmondson was able to take his deductions for his drug dealing business. Congress did not like this result. Congress wanted the public policy exception to apply to unlawful drug dealing. So, in 1982, Congress adopted Section 280E, which codified the public policy exception for illegal drug dealing. You can see Section 280E displayed below. Once again, I'll put the link to this article in the show notes so that you can do your own research.
I don't know the origins of 280E, but the remedies for 280E, the instruction, the establishment of 280E in cannabis, and then Section 471, which is the carve out that allows for the deductions on cost of goods sold,
And how you calculate
cost of goods sold, are based on court cases that have happened in the last 6 or 7 years in California. Federal tax cases. Champ, Harborside, and then the Harborside Appeal are the three tax cases that established 280E, 471.
They didn't establish, but they probably put a finer point on them.
Codified it into tax law.
And helped people understand how to apply that. What does that mean for me in a business? What does that mean for them in a business? What applies, what doesn't, what's allowable under it, what's not. It created a lot more clarification.
Gotcha.
And that's the way, tax law works in this country. You challenge it, or the IRS says you can't do that, and you hire a lawyer and says, yeah, we can.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say the interesting thing in the state of Illinois. So we made reference that is the federal level.
Yeah.
So in 2020, starting January of 2023, Illinois took the perspective, as a few other states have. I don't know the count right now. They decoupled. So they said, if you are a business in the state of Illinois, at a state level, we will allow you deductions and credits. So at the state level,
Nice.
you are not penalized for being a license holder and being in the cannabis space. So that creates more tracking and more work and more, you need to make sure that you're compliant at the federal level, but then you do get these benefits, these deductions and credits at the state level. And I think
for a business like ours, it comes in handy because basically if you're a licensed cannabis business in the state of Illinois and you can take advantage of this decoupling, you're going to require 2 sets of books. You're going to require your federal books and your state books, because what you're allowed to do from tax perspective is different on those 2 tax returns.
1 set of books, 2 sets of reports.
Again, that's why she's the accountant.
Gotcha. So that's interesting. So if I could just, kind of put it back for a layman, before those changes happened at the state level, you'd get to the end of the year, you'd perhaps owe a lot on your federal or state taxes.
Both.
And then, since people, it's probably not their first time getting into the business, they might be like, oh, hey, we're going to write this stuff off. We got all this equipment. We got all this blah, blah, blah.
The rude
Come
awakening.
to find out they can't.
Rude awakening.
There was a study a couple of years back, I don't remember, within the last 4 years, and a sampling of cannabis-based business returns were reviewed. And I don't remember the number, but I know it was more than 60% were filed incorrectly.
Gotcha.
That they were taking deductions and credits, or they were taking more than they should have been, more than they were allowed to. So when the audit process occurs, that has the potential to be a rude awakening that, you know, you don't get all of these deductions and credits that you took, and the taxes that you paid or the taxes that you didn't pay are going to increase drastically as that return is audited and amended. So that's one of the things when we talk to folks, depending on where they're at in their journey, we always make sure if you have filed, let's take a look and see were they filed correctly. My opinion with the IRS, it's always better for you to find your error and resolve that error instead of them finding that error and telling you how to resolve that. So that's something that I
think it's also worthwhile to say that even the largest cannabis companies in this state, the MSOs that are headquarters in Illinois, but that operate in multiple states, most of them carry huge tax burdens to the government right now because the interest on that is cheaper than any interest they could get on money if they were trying to borrow capital to help stand up their business or help keep their business going. And so they operate knowing they have this tax burden that's owed to the government that they're not paying because
or they're on a payment plan
because that's the cheapest way to get credit.
Sure. That's super, super interesting. So this 280E change in Illinois, was that a pretty big deal for operators? I mean, a sizable, like, I know it's not the solution to the whole problem, and we might talk about what could be that in a moment, but
it shows that the state is a active partner in the cannabis industry. Now, it benefits the MSOs more than it benefits anybody because they make the most money.
Sure.
But it is proportionately beneficial to any business in the state.
Yeah, they don't got to worry about it anymore.
Right. It is, and we saw it as the state's way to help people become operational. For those, those small businesses where that amount of money might be whether they could keep their doors open or close their doors, it makes a difference.
Yeah. I just want to thank you both again for coming out to see me. I've been excited.
Thanks
to
for
chat
having
with
us.
you.
Thanks for having us come here.
Yeah.
I don't know where you usually do it, but this is a nice venue.
Nice venue.
Anywhere and everywhere, really. Usually from home. Home wasn't the greatest place to do it today. I was thinking about having you guys over to my humble abode with the kitties and all the weed that we've got some rolled up right now, so we can partake in that. But yeah, thank you for coming out here and joining me.
We've been trying to make this happen for a while. It seems like we've been talking about it. It's one of those things. You being, where you are and us being in Champaign, it's, when you're close, you're like, oh, we can get to it. We'll actually get it on the calendar. So.
Yeah, totally. Well, so we have kind of been alluding to it. There's this potential of a change towards rescheduling. I actually just read the other day on Twitter, so take that for what it's worth, that this may not have the 280E impact that a lot of people thought it could, but let's just say it did.
So if it is rescheduled, if it comes off, if cannabis is removed from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, 280E no longer applies because cannabis is not on Schedule 1. It is no longer trafficking an illegal substance. So 280E doesn't apply. So when that goes into play, that immediately is a tax relief for anybody that's a license holder, anybody that's in that space. Now, what does that mean big picture? Hard to know because we don't know what it's going to look like.
Sure.
How they're going to roll it out.
Right.
And we're in comment period now. So there's no way to tell what the result or the effect's going to be at the end because we don't know what it's going to look like at the end. And we don't know how they planned to implement it and, what new regulations are they going to try to put into place.
But either way, it's good news for people like you, right?
It's good news for everybody because, it should be good news for everybody because, basically you wake up one morning and you potentially have 15 to 30% more cash flow, 15 to 30% less tax due. That change and hopefully changes the landscape, not only in the amount of tax that's due, but does that help with banking? Does that help with merchant services? Does that help with the cost of payroll, of HR, of all of those ancillary things that are significantly more expensive in the cannabis space because it's dealing with an illicit market?
A lot of the people
the
we
federal.
talk to is that this is like a touchstone moment. This is something that if it moves from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, it will hopefully remove a lot of the stigma. It will hopefully remove a lot of the reluctance from a business standpoint, from a political standpoint. One would hope that it would lead to the passage of safe banking so that we could help clients and help anybody involved with cannabis get reliable credit card and merchant services. And
Or just bank accounts.
Just get a bank account that they can
Yeah.
help, you know.
And I know we didn't have that really. I should have texted you that so that you could mentally prepare. But if you could, just kind of off the cuff, how does that work? I've always heard like it's like you find a credit union. My girlfriend used to work at a dispensary, so she had to
Right.
get a credit union.
Right. So credit unions tend to be more, big banks tend to not want to work in the cannabis space because they're federally chartered. Credit unions are state chartered. So a big bank is not going to want to risk their federal banking charter by banking and doing business with other businesses that are participating in a federally illegal market. So, I mean, even us as ancillary, we had an account and we were, we weren't shy about it. I mean, I shouldn't say we weren't shy about it. We were open about what our business model is.
Mhm.
When we opened the account, the banker that we were sitting across the desk from was like, okay, I get it. Opened the account, deposited, had the account for about a week, got a call, and they're like, your account has been red flagged. You earn money from the plant. I'm like, well, but we're not plant touching, right? But your clients are plant touching. So even us in an ancillary position are impacted by the lack of safe banking.
Wow.
So
we're on our third bank.
right. So we are at a
Didn't even think
bank
about
that is
that.
a small community-based bank that is very aware of our business model. We have to provide information, about where our funds coming from. If we collect more than a threshold amount of money from any one client, we have to prove that we're working in the legal market and not in the black market. But they have decided, their board, they have decided that
It's not worth the risk.
they're okay with that for ancillary. They don't
Gotcha.
they don't take anybody that's plant touching, but anybody that is plant touching, you have multiple different additional components to banking. High cash transactions. I heard a story about a dispensary that opened a bank account at the bank down the road, and the first time that they took a pile of cash in to deposit it, the bank is like, we don't take cash deposits in that amount. You have to make sure that the mechanisms are in place at the bank for them to transact the kind of business that you need to transact. And many of them don't want to do that because of the risk perspective.
Well, and if you're running a dispensary, you have to have enough bank accounts so you only have $200,000 in each one because that's the limit on
FDIC.
FDIC. You're only insured
Oh.
up to $200,000.
Oh, right.
So you don't want to have $1 million in a bank account because if the bank fails, you're only covered to $200,000.
I learned that from Ozark.
Yes.
That's where a lot of my
Sweeping.
accounting
Yes.
knowledge comes
Bank
from.
sweeping. And then there is also a lot of compliance and risk assessment with the amount of money that's going through banks.
Mm-hmm.
Most cannabis bank accounts have high fees. It's high risk, so they have high fees. Merchant processing. We have a client that is not plant touching, but again, because they are an ancillary
Mhm.
and most of their consumers are buying with them because they are consuming cannabis, they're in that same space. So they are also subject to audits, high risk, all of that. So it isn't just license holders that are impacted. Safe banking would change the landscape and save a lot of money for many, many businesses in this environment.
Yeah. I just wish I could use my fucking credit card sometimes. Like it would be I would have to be very responsible about it. But
She will tell you never dip your credit card in a dispensary.
The problem is, the hurdle is, there are a lot of, and it's
Necessity of the marketplace.
exactly, it's the necessity of the marketplace, and it's also some maybe not so legitimate players in the space. Oh, hey, I can come in and figure out how to set up credit card processing for this
Sure.
dispensary, and I'm going to charge them a crazy amount of money, and I only have to make it for 7 months, and then they can go get a different service, and I've made enough money, it's worth it to me. But if you ever look at your bank statement and a purchase that you made says groceries or clothing, or it's something that isn't really what you bought,
right.
That's fraud.
that's fraud. That's credit card fraud.
Oh wow.
So the hurdle is, Visa and MasterCard have both said you may not process cannabis-based transactions on our systems, on our
Wow.
rails. So the challenge in that space is providers creating compliant ways and mechanisms to process those transactions.
Mm.
Some of them are very legitimate. Some of them are very not.
Yeah.
We've come across and we've done just observational audits on, security fee or secrecy fee, I think was one of them, that somebody was charging a secrecy fee on their ATM transactions at their dispensary. If that's not a red flag, then you're
Right.
not paying
Interesting.
attention.
Right.
Now, does that MasterCard thing you were talking about extend to, like, I won't, name any names, but I've gone to dispensaries and I can use my MasterCard debit.
That's the difference. So that's
the
debit.
difference.
So
Gotcha.
it's the difference between debit and credit. So you think of, if I'm putting in my PIN number,
Yep.
that's an ACH transaction.
Gotcha. Is that like on a
Those-
certain rail?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the separate rails.
Gotcha.
If you, just like you can't swipe your credit card to buy a lottery ticket, well, I don't think you can. For a long time, you cannot buy a lottery ticket. You cannot gamble using your credit card, Visa, MasterCard. They don't allow it.
Wow.
Same with cannabis. You cannot use a Visa or MasterCard credit card
Mhm.
to purchase.
Yeah.
You shouldn't.
Let's not
Right.
rack up credit card
Right.
debt on weed.
And
Well,
but
that's why I'm kind of glad you can't right now, because that's what I'd be doing.
Right. So, but there are a number of solutions out there. So there are the ones that are using ACH, debit, things like that. There are others. I can't remember the name of them, but
Every
There-
dispensary has an ATM in the lobby too. But
Agreed.
again, that's-
Right. right. And an ATM is standalone. You are taking cash out, debit your account, getting cash to make your purchase. There are also, I don't know how prevalent they are right now, but there were a lot in the market last year at NECANN that were going with like the gift card approach. So I go to my local dispensary, they have their program. I put $50 on my account. So I'm doing a direct ACH from my checking or savings account into my account with ABC Dispensary.
Mhm.
And then I've got that money basically on a gift card with them. And then they're charging against
Right.
that. So there's a number of different things out there. The thing that I always encourage people is ask your processor if you can get a letter that says, we recognize and approve that you are processing cannabis transactions.
Gotcha.
If they get squishy about that, you maybe need to look into it. If they are not
Have a
ready,
backup plan.
right? If they are not ready to give you a letter, or they get nervous if you're asking for that kind of thing, look a little deeper, be a little bit aware.
Gotcha. And what's going on? Sorry for the brief tangent, but what's going on when you scan the debit at the terminal? I'm not doing it at the ATM. Are they like, they say they're running it as an ATM, and they even tell me you've got an ATM transaction fee. At the end of the night, are they like is cash falling out of an ATM? Or like, what's going on?
Basically what they're doing is they use a service provider that has coded in the background that it works like an ATM.
Okay.
So instead of you going up to the ATM at CVS to get cash to go buy,
Yes.
your cookies and your soda and your pharmacy at CVS, or going to the ATM in the lobby of the dispensary, you're doing it there at the counter. Some of them are, I have not looked into those lately. At the early onset, like the first NECANN that we went to 4 years ago, I went home and researched every one of them, and 50% were non-compliant. I think more and more people are becoming aware and a little more educated. And I think the market is maturing, that people are understanding that there has to be a compliant
and people
option.
with a proven product and a proven process are going to still be in business, rise to the top and be flourishing.
Right.
So presumably.
It's, it's like with anything. If something doesn't quite seem right, look into it. If something doesn't quite sound right, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. If this guy's charging you high fees and the next guy comes along and says, oh, well, I can do it for 3%, it's probably too good to be true.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some other things that we might not be thinking about or that I haven't brought up already that cannabis businesses, it seems like a lot of the talk is around 280E. I mean, is that it? Or are there other weird things that you have to...
280E is big because of the financial impact.
Sure.
That immediately cuts your margin. You just don't have as much margin to have profit because 280E is so large.
I see. I'm mixing two topics. You've got 280E, which would help that, but then you've got safe banking, which would help the part where you can actually use banks. Is that right?
Yes, and and then there are the other components of insurance, payroll processing. For example, you can have your books on QuickBooks, but you cannot process payroll on QuickBooks. You cannot.
QuickBooks is not cannabis friendly.
Right. You cannot process card transactions through QuickBooks. So if you send an invoice to somebody, they cannot use QuickBooks internal mechanism to pay that invoice with a card.
Mm-hmm.
It's a compliance, it's a risk, and some businesses are okay with that, some are not.
Yeah.
He asked what's the thing that we're not thinking about or that he's not asking about, and you're missing the obvious answer. Just coming off of tax season is that it doesn't matter if you haven't made any money. It doesn't matter. You have to file your taxes if you're a business, and we come across this so much with cannabis businesses that are new. And this is their third, they got their license when the licenses came out in 2020, and they've been struggling and trying to get everything together, and they've been trying to get capital. They've been trying to get a location. They're trying to make it through to get those doors open. And we get a call, or and they haven't filed any taxes. And they're like, well, I haven't made any money. And
right. And taxes aren't just about making money. So I always say the IRS wants to know what you're doing. If you're making money, they obviously want to know because they want their share. If you're not doing anything, they want to know that. And if you're losing money, as businesses start up and get moving, a lot of them have a few years of loss. They also want to know that.
Sure.
Because you register for an EIN, because you set up your business, the IRS knows you're there. It's not like when you do, I always say a Tupperware. If you're a Tupperware lady, the IRS doesn't know who all the Tupperware ladies are. The IRS knows who the license holders are. The state knows who the license holders are. And you need to work with your tax professional. We always say, people will say, we don't need an accountant yet because we're not making any money. You need an accountant at the same time that you need an attorney, because you want to make sure that you are keeping on top of those things, that you are compliant. There are guidelines around. There are some exceptions when you don't have to file a tax return, depending on what your entity structure is, depending on what your specific situation is. But the idea that we didn't make any money, so I don't have to file taxes,
not true.
is not true in most situations.
Gotcha. Because they want to know.
Yeah.
Well, and from a 280E perspective, now that it looks like rescheduling is going to happen, we want to make sure that people have taxes filed so that if there's the opportunity to go back and recapture, depending, if 280E goes into effect this calendar year, can we go back to January 1st?
Right.
Can we claim
Can you
all that
amend
stuff?
anything? Can you go back to...
You need an accountant who's keeping track of all that stuff, because if it drops before the election or if it drops this calendar year, it may be back to January 1st, and a lot of people could save this year's money.
Right. And we don't really know. That's some of, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how it's going to roll out. We don't know what it's going to look like, but it's always positioning yourself so that you hopefully have options.
Yeah. Well, damn, I feel like that was a really big gem right there that people, I could feel like I could clip that moment. Because that's something that I feel like a lot of people may not be thinking about to both of your points. You know, it's like, especially here in Illinois when people are just getting started.
Right.
So it's like they might be thinking, well, we just got started,
Right.
you know, and it's
Right.
like,
You've been in business for 4 years.
Yeah.
You just finally got
Right.
your product. You got your doors
You got your
open.
doors open, but that doesn't mean you just started your business.
yeah, that is crazy.
Mhm.
That is crazy. So, well, thank you. Anything else, like, just like I say, complications or anything else? Like, let me ask you this: one of the first reports I ever saw when weed became legal in Colorado, I think it's like I probably looked at it through rose-colored glasses, but it just like I just remember it birthing what we are seeing now, you know. And one of the reports that they discussed was, of course, cannabis is an all-cash business, and so there's these like. At the time, there were these like security companies that were contracted to like transport cash, and it's, you know, they're all gunned up, and a lot of the interesting part, just a quick side note on the report, was like a lot of them were like former military or police, and what they were saying was like, it's crazy because I used to be on the other side of these deals. Like I'd be busting deals like this.
Mhm.
Now I'm helping like to bring the cash into, you know, everything else.
Yes. So yeah, there are still, depending on the volume of cash that you transact, large dispensaries do have armored trucks that come on whatever cycle that they need to pick up their money and take it to a Federal Reserve depository location. Their money might not go to their regular bank. It may go to a Federal Reserve deposit location that then banks that cash and reports it to their actual bank.
Gotcha.
It really depends on how much cash transaction you're doing. If you have those debit options, if you've got electronic payment options, as those are becoming more prevalent, I think cash usage is decreasing, but there's always going to be people that it is a highly cash business.
Yeah.
High volume of cash.
And this is my comedic question for the episode. I always like to try to be funny from time to time. I mentioned Ozark earlier. I really feel like if Ozark was set, like if they just waited to film the first season, one of the things the Birds would have done in Missouri is they would have bought a dispensary, because the whole show was about finding all cash businesses.
Exactly. Yes.
So they would have the strip club, the restaurant,
the
dispensary.
casino.
Oh, the casino.
Yes,
Yep,
they had the casino in the last season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that show.
Missouri got some things right about cannabis, but we've had some conversations with people that said Missouri's seeing some of the same struggles that Illinois is seeing,
Yeah.
especially with the small licensees.
The micro.
So
Yeah, I heard they had a real good start, and you know that now maybe there are supply shortages.
Well,
So-
it's mirroring what happened in Illinois. The MSOs control the market, the micro licensees, even though they have this captive marketplace between the cultivators and the micro licensed dispensaries, they don't have the capital to get open. I mean, they're
Right.
facing the same financing struggles that every licensee is facing, and they just can't get up and get running, and they don't have, you know.
They have the supply chain set up, but not all components of the supply chain are active.
Right.
Gotcha.
So
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to see this all play out. And speaking of seeing some of this play out, I wanted to ask you all what finance is like for a hemp business. Is it just to get to brass tacks? Is it just like normal?
Yes and no. So it does not have, all of these things are regulated. All of these things, hemp is probably more normal than, it's absolutely more normal than cannabis, but closer to standard business, typical
normal's
business.
a bad word. Typical.
But they have additional excise tax. They have additional hemp taxes based on the product that you're selling. So it's a different component. And again, on that topic, even if we get rescheduled from 1 to 3, that doesn't make it immediately easier. It's just a different set of compliance. There will be regulation. There will be, not knowing what that's going to look like. There's a different set of regulation. There's a different set of compliance to keep up with, which is some of what hemp is dealing with now. They have different levels of compliance, different components of compliance.
Mm-hmm.
Pharmacy is the same way. pharmaceuticals have different compliance, FDA, all of those kinds of things. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the landscape looks like, how this rolls out, how does that impact people, what happens with the hemp, with the Farm Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely isn't a crazy, like whatever, something's obviously going to happen and who knows what it's going to be. But at least as it stands now, like I had Charlie Bachtell on the show, and one of the things that he was saying is they have access to traditional banking, can
Absolutely.
accept credit cards,
Yes.
can be listed
Yes.
on the stock exchange.
Yes.
That industry can't possibly compete with an identical product, truly identical, being sold at a store that doesn't have to pay for a state license, doesn't have to comply with state regulatory structures and the cost of those, doesn't have to pay that excise tax,
The
can
bank.
take credit cards,
Yeah.
can raise capital, can go public on U.S. exchanges, doesn't have 280E. One way or another, these two things have to be reconciled. So it might be an incredible opportunity that can't be ignored. My desire would still be, though, then, okay, whatever it is, if your business is in that realm, you have to accept and incorporate the obligation to be responsible and respectable. Because if you're not, then all you're going to do is make the naysayers right, entrench them in their position, and stifle the opportunity to get the reform that all of us want for cannabis.
I speak with Charlie Bachtell about hemp, license limitations, home grow for all, and more in episode 39 of The Cole Memo.
It's crazy.
When I look at hemp, when I consider hemp, and in comparison to cannabis, to THC licensed cannabis, is that when you have cannabis, yes, you have your you have your licensees, you got your dispensary people, you got your cultivation people, you got your manufacturers, and even within those groups, you have your big MSOs, and then you have your small licensees, your social equity people. In hemp, the spectrum is just so wide, and there's so many people in this industry. Cannabis is very public facing in that it's hard to be anonymous in cannabis, but it seems like it's very easy to be anonymous in hemp and to be doing things in hemp. I don't want to say shady. But there's a lot more going on in hemp that we don't see and that we don't understand, I feel like.
Well, I think some of it is just that's not where the focus is and the microscope isn't on it. I mean, with any industry, I think there's
there's a lack of regulation that lends itself to an unfamiliarity of the process and the product that personally concerns me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel with cannabis, it being regulated and tested and everything, it feels like a much safer alternative.
Yes, it is much more regulated on the cannabis side than the hemp side. And the other thing with hemp is there's the industrial use of hemp. There are so many other things with hemp, not just the consumption aspect of hemp that needs to be.
Absolutely.
I think that will be another large component of whatever comes about with the Farm Bill.
Right. I was trying to take notes because you touched on like 3 different points. I'm gonna try to get to them. So, anonymity behind hemp licensing. It's open licensing. So what the deal is that it's hard to know what these companies are.
Right.
Like, these companies pop up day by day. You have some trustable ones that like put their name behind it, like this.
Absolutely.
as Jane and Myries.
Many very
But-
good hemp companies and people in hemp
Right.
with
But-
good product.
There are a lot of weird ones. Like I've got this video that if I can find it quickly, I'll try to show you, and I'll put it in the podcast as well so people can see it. There are things going on that are definitely concerning, and I think that we should have at the very least the same testing and labeling standards for these hemp products.
Yeah, you know what you're consuming.
Correct. That was one of the points I wanted to address. Cannabis testing, as it stands right now, is not perfect. The Chicago Sun-Times has done it, but it's a start. And during the episode, I referenced an investigation by the Chicago Sun-Times. In case you missed it, I did an episode with the journalists behind this investigation. I'll have that episode of my podcast linked in the show notes for this episode if you'd like to check it out and learn more. The headline was, "What's in Illinois Weed? Sometimes Contaminants
Sun Times testing finds. You can also check out episode number 59 of the Cole Memo, which I'll have linked in the show notes. That episode features Dr. Bob Miller from ACT Laboratories. They are a cannabis testing lab. In fact, you might recognize them from the label on the legal products you may have obtained from your local dispensary. Check out episode number 59 to find out more about the issues that exist with cannabis testing. During this conversation, I sort of trail off on this idea, so I'd like to take this time to elaborate on what I'd like to say, or rather, what I meant to say. I say something to the effect of, it's not perfect, but it's a start. I think I stand by those words. It seems like hemp operators have agreed to being tested at the same standards as cannabis operators. In fact, I've been told by some that they use the same exact labs already. So why not? Ultimately, the debate around hemp comes down to license limitations. While you might read about the public safety concerns in the headlines, the actual debate really centers around license limitations. You can learn more about that in episode 96 of the Cole Memo. There's a few episodes we've done with the Illinois Hemp Growers Association on this exact topic.
I think that's
As long as
really
everybody's
strong
in the
point.
same process, even if that process is flawed, as long as everyone is subject to that process.
Like, what the hell's that?
Oh, geez.
Ugh.
Yeah, so that doesn't need to be happening. I don't think that's good
I
at
don't
all.
like
Like,
it
what
when-
the hell's that on the fingers?
Ugh.
Yeah, and
No
that's the type of shit that I don't think should be. If it's gonna happen, it needs to be tested, and we figure out what the hell that is. Because I've never seen anything like that in all of my years of smoking.
I think if we fast forward on descheduling or reschedule, I keep saying descheduling. Nobody's going to deschedule.
Right. No.
this. Not
No. Reschedule.
Not in the next decade or two. But rescheduling is, I think it's going to be a model so close to what like liquor stores are now, that it's going to be regulated, but it's going to be regulated at the point of, at purchase, obviously during the manufacturing and processing point. But I don't think that there's any outcome of this rescheduling that makes it harder for people to walk into a place like this with cash
Correct.
and buy cannabis, that they're not going to involve a doctor and a prescription and more bureaucracy. Hopefully they don't.
Right. I mean,
There doesn't need to be more checks in the system than there are now.
right. The goal needs to be a way for people to be able to accessibility balanced with regulation.
Yeah,
And,
And
we're
I-
not going to touch on the omnibusman, but medical patients need to be able to go anywhere they want,
Right.
and buy anything,
Yeah.
at any dispensary. I mean, that's the most ridiculous
Yeah.
thing about all of this. But
yeah.
that's a different podcast.
Yeah, we can do, yeah. And so the other point you had brought up, though, anonymity behind the hemp. The one thing I will say that sucks about Illinois cannabis law as it stands is you can't find out who's behind these license holders. Like if you do FOIA requests, the Chicago Tribune, I believe, took the state of Illinois to court. I don't know where that ever went, but it's like under lock and key. I've done some FOIA requests that ultimately get denied because they will not reveal who these owners are. And
I wanted to quickly cite what I was referring to with regard to confidentiality in cannabis licensing. On May 3rd, 2020, the Chicago Tribune reported marijuana entrepreneurs are starting to rake in millions of dollars a month in Illinois as customers line up to buy newly legal weed. But who's profiting from those sales remains secret. Regulators say state law bars the release of almost all information businesses have to submit to get lucrative licenses to grow or sell cannabis. As a result, the public can't see records that could show whether pot businesses have questionable funding sources or ties to unsavory people. That's proven problematic in other state-regulated industries, such as gambling, where revelations of reputed mob ties have sent officials scrambling. Concerns about a lack of transparency came up last year. the reports referring to the year of 2019, before the passage of the law that legalized recreational pot. Sponsors Senator Heather Staines and State Representative Kelly Cassidy vowed to, quote, make ownership data completely accessible, end quote. Despite that pledge, their bill passed with a confidentiality provision that the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation cited in denying the Tribune's open records request for application and ownership information about marijuana dispensaries. The state is applying similar secrecy to cultivation businesses. If you'd like to learn more about the history of cannabis in Illinois, go to thecolememo.com/history and check out our series on the history of cannabis in Illinois.
Of course, just to play their side of it, they say, hey, we are selling federally illegal substances. We prefer our information not be out there.
When we first got into cannabis accounting and we were looking for clients, we thought we wanted to know who these CEOs were and these board people on these big companies and these big MSOs, because they were the ones that are in business and had shops open and were making money. And just by, like she said, 4 NECAN conventions, and we went to Lucky Leaf in Kansas City, and, you know, we attend Jason's events when he has those. You know. This is an industry that's based on a community of people, and getting out there and meeting people and having conversations and listening to their problems and, you know, getting on phone calls with them. Hey, I got a phone call coming up. Can you just sit in the background and just listen to make sure that this person's not, you know, selling me something or trying to steal money from me? I mean, we do that a lot.
Right. And it's very relationship based. It is, you know, and I hadn't really thought about this, but for people that have been in the legacy market, and it was a few years ago that we had this conversation. Boy, it's like nobody's going to, like, when we have a discovery call or we have an initial call with somebody, we're like, tell us about your revenues. Tell us about what your business looks like. Tell us about, you know, what are you producing? All of these details about their business. And money and finances is personal to begin with. But people that have been in the legacy market for so long are like, what do you mean
I don't keep records like that.
Right.
What do you want me to go to prison?
We don't talk about that. What do
a
you,
legacy cultivator, somebody who's been growing for 25 or 30 years, who now may have a very legitimate position with a grow or something like that. We're like,
it's a shift. It's a shift in mindset.
That doesn't exist. And that's stuff that's core information that we need in order to help set their business up. And it just doesn't exist because had it existed 5-10 years ago, that's the kind of thing that lands you in the hopeless.
Right. So it, you know, a lot of it is relationship building. A lot of it is community. A lot of it is, and we also find that everybody's in it together. This is a business environment, and, you know, it's community based. There are people that are willing to help their quote unquote competitors. It's collaboration. It's not competition. And, you know, we're seeing more and more of that that's just the landscape of this kind of business, more so than others that we've seen.
Yeah. And I was most excited to talk to you, not just because I love these drinks and these products. That's where I come from with this topic, hemp. It's afforded me, this is what I've been saying.
Yeah, this is River Bluff. Yeah, these guys put out amazing product.
Yeah, it's great. And what I say about things like this, or the Jane and Mary's, which they have over there, which I buy about a case a month.
This is hemp done right.
Exactly.
River Bluff is hemp done right. KIFCure is hemp done right.
Mm-hmm.
These are people in Illinois that are running fantastic hemp businesses.
And would be happy to comply with, you know, whatever regulations.
But it doesn't make any sense to go in and shut these things down.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah. And my thing that I was telling legislators, because I went to Springfield when they were considering passing House Bill 4293, which proponents of that bill argued it wasn't a ban. It was simply regulation, but really it was limited licensing of accessing these types of products. And all I'm saying is that, like you both led with the best points about this whole thing. It needs to be tested. It needs to be labeled. It needs to be age gated so that kids can't get it.
Absolutely.
And it already is taxed. I will say, as you pointed out, it's got your local taxes or whatever. But I suppose if it would make people happy that these products were taxed at the same rate as cannabis products so that it went to things like the R3 program or whatever else, I guess I'd be open to that. I know that cost would be passed to the consumer, but
There's also the tipping point, though, of how much do you tax and what does that impact the revenue? I mean, do you add more tax to bring in more tax dollars, but does that cut down the overall net because fewer people are spending money? Because every person has a price point for their product, and that has to include the amount that they pay in tax. It would be interesting to do some kind of, and it's maybe out there and I haven't looked it up, but what is the case study of the tipping point where increasing taxes actually reduces overall tax revenue because people stop buying it because it's cost prohibitive now?
Well, it's like going to Indiana for cigarettes, right? Like that's an Illinois thing. I'm just saying.
Fireworks.
Yeah, fireworks too. Yeah. But I mean, I've heard that people specifically will go, we better get going. Better plan our trip.
Hey, well, and we're in Tilton.
We're close. We're close.
Man.
Knock out two birds with one stone,
There
get
you go.
fireworks
Beef
and
house,
cigarettes at a low
fireworks.
Right.
Yeah, that's why you come.
It does really at some degree boil down to the math.
Mm-hmm.
What will the market bear?
Yeah, what will the market? Yeah, that's exactly it. And if I could, the one point I was just trying to make with this is like this, it's afforded me more freedom and access to cannabis than any state-based program ever has. And what I mean by that is I got these mailed to my front door. I paid with my credit card. I paid it off at the end of the month, but the fact that I was able to put it on for a little bit because I did. Yeah. Anyways, that's
right.
There are so many parts of the hemp business model that work so well.
Gosh,
that cannabis would love.
Yeah.
Right.
If they could have access to. So again, shutting this down doesn't make any sense, but there has to be tighter there. You got to rein it in just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit more control.
So anyways, that's very interesting to hear that that's another way in which they benefit. Not only do they have all those cool things and flexibility, like being able to mail it across state lines or to our doors, or there are technically no dosage caps or possession limits. So I bought like 9 cases of this stuff. Those are all cool things that can't happen here. Like we went over into that dispensary, we're all limited per purchase.
Right.
Just seems a little weird. And I love that this is what comes with descheduling cannabis. Not only those things, but then the tax benefits and all the finance, all the things you don't frankly have to worry about. But of course,
you're not in the cannabis business. If you're in the cannabis business, it's a lot of what you think about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Almost all the time.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I was about to say, it's not like they don't worry about those things. They're not worried about them now, but they're starting to, because like you said earlier, it's becoming a discussion at the federal level, thanks to Illinois Representative Mary Miller. I actually spoke to her husband as well. He obviously isn't involved in the federal level, though. He's a state representative. Anyways, there are 2 ways, like you said, in which this landscape could change. So just like cannabis, just like hemp, which of course, same plant, just vastly different regulations. There are big changes that could be right around the corner with
And
rescheduling
it
and the
could go,
Farm Bill.
and on both of them, it could go 20 different ways.
Right.
And if
Right.
anybody
You said there's 2 things that are going to change.
2 things are going to change, but how they end up,
Right.
there's
It's
so many
like-
permutations.
Right.
on that,
Yeah.
Right.
And if you talk to anybody and they say they know what's going to happen, they don't.
Yeah.
And if you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers.
Or more.
But a point you made earlier, I really do believe that you're onto something. It's something I've discussed on the show. You said, like, I don't think that rescheduling is necessarily going to upend everything we've done, like the building we're sitting in right now. And I tend to agree because, first of all, I don't foresee that happening. What I actually foresee it allowing is just a more direct path to make those Schedule 3 medications, which are not anything that we're like totally. I think the thing that people would be most familiar with is Epidiolex, but you've got Marinol, and then there's a third one that I can't think of.
The benefits we didn't talk about obviously are research.
Right.
medical research,
Right. When it goes to Schedule
academic
3,
research.
there's money available for
Funding
research,
opens up,
for,
yeah.
NIH can work on things. There are,
From a business and financing standpoint, the obvious benefits are safer banking, 280E
right.
relief.
Yes, we
But
talked about
across
those kinds of
across
things.
the spectrum, medical research, plant research, product research.
Right.
I just feel like one thing that we're going to see is it's kind of like this bifurcated approach where you'll have that Schedule 3. It'll be a lot easier to research the plant, like you say, but you'll have a new coal memo issued. It'll be a Garland memo, though, from Attorney General Merrick Garland. And that's actually been promised in the past, by the way. He said, hey, we're going to issue a new coal memo. And
hands off.
I can't help but wonder if it all happens around this fall, because of course that's when that's due. I will also say the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which protects states from interfering in medical states, that expires this fall.
I misspoke during this part of the podcast. Right now, I'm displaying my screen. You can see that the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, also known as the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment, is legislation that was introduced by U.S. Representative Maurice Hinchey in 2001. The legislation prohibited the Justice Department from spending funds to interfere with the implementation of state medical cannabis laws. The amendment does not change the legal status of cannabis and must be renewed each fiscal year in order to remain in effect. The part that I did not misspeak on is the fact that as of March 9th, 2024, the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment is effective through September 30th, 2024.
I feel like everything is due this fall, and you're just going to see
stakes
these
attached to November's election.
Yeah.
Cole, are you going on the record saying that it's important to get out there and vote this November?
I think that's what we're saying.
You may be breaking a story here.
Yep.
Maybe, yeah.
For anybody that's under a rock. Right.
We're getting close, and I want to finish up with my funny story about Jim Belushi.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So Jim was the featured speaker on Friday. He gave the keynote address, and Chicago royalty.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Belushi, he can walk into any restaurant, any bar in the city. He even mentioned during his remarks he was having dinner with Governor Pritzker
Later in the week.
Big fan of the governor. I would say his remarks were very, very personal.
Mm-hmm.
They were at times emotional.
Mm-hmm.
This is a man that very much believes in the power of the plant, and he is very much a cultivator. He's a grower.
Mm-hmm.
He is somebody that has spent time worrying about keeping these things alive, keeping his girls alive. He refers to them as as his girls. And the remarks, and he didn't have a lot of prepared remarks, went almost immediately to questions from the audience. And there were some good questions. There were some good questions asked. There was some back and forth. But when you get into these events, sometimes people like to tell their own story. They want to hear themselves talk. Right. They want this person up there to hear their story, and
validate their position.
They want to feel the empathy, and they want the validation. And we were getting a couple of those.
Yeah.
And again, he's very passionate, and he's telling stories about encounters he's having with people and with veterans and everything. And it was very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
The room was very, very heavy. And I'm the smart ass. I'm the guy in the room that's going to crack the inappropriate joke. That's me. That's always been me. I worked as a stand-up comedian. I'm going to try to make a funny. And this is a funny guy. This is a guy who's legitimately funny. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of sitting there trying to get called on.
Right.
I looked like, and they probably thought this is just a guy that wants to hear his voice. This is just a guy who's going to tell us his story.
Right.
But I wanted to set him up. I wanted, let's have a little fun. You're a comedian.
Right.
Half the people in this room are, let's have a little fun. And so when they finally called on me, I said, why don't you tell us your funniest consumption story? You're somebody that probably smokes cannabis with some people, maybe a celebrity that would surprise us.
Yeah.
I asked this guy to tell us a funny story, and you would have thought I asked him for his PIN number. He had no interest in answering that question. Countered with, you want to know how many celebrities I've slept or how many women I've slept with? I mean, immediately turned it that way. And then he told like a vaudevillian, like Catskills comedian joke that, you know, had nothing to do with cannabis, nothing to do with anything, you know, about an old couple walking on the beach and finding a genie's bottle and everything. And I'm like, who doesn't take the opportunity to tell a funny story about getting high?
Yeah.
And I get it. If you don't want to give somebody up, if you don't want to name names, have a story loaded where it's Willie Nelson.
Sure.
Willie's not going to care,
Right.
even if it's
Right.
not true.
Right.
Just say,
Right.
oh, it's Willie Nelson. And then tell a story about who it actually is, but just say it was Willie. You know?
Right.
You got to, if you're a comedian appearing at a cannabis convention, I need you to have a funny story locked and loaded to tell.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem like he came with a funny story. And I was kind of,
But I think some of that, it was a non-controlled environment. He doesn't know who's
Sure.
filming. He doesn't know who's
everybody
recording.
had their camera out.
You
So
know.
I get it. He didn't say, oh, yeah. You know, Britney Spears, you know,
Right.
Whatever.
you know.
Whoever.
So,
Right.
Disclaimer. He
Right.
did not say, he said,
No,
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 one's
no,
name.
no, no, no.
Well, the video guys behind us, we were like in the back row. The video guys behind us they were told no audio. They could shoot B-roll only,
Right.
but they couldn't record.
I was
what
actually
he
going
was
to ask you afterwards if like Ambrose event was recorded because I wanted to watch it.
Some
back, but-
some of them were.
Okay.
But specifically for Jim Belushi's, we overheard them saying no audio recording.
Oh, interesting.
And he came out with the harmonica.
He did,
played,
yep.
He played a little blues riff on
Yep,
the harmonica.
yep.
I mean, he played the part. And
Yes.
he's very compassionate about it.
Was there any talk? You said there was a lot of questions. I know he had recently commented about taxes were too high. Did anybody ask him about like something like that?
He did, and that was with a reference to dinner with the governor. Is he said,
Oh,
we're having those conversations. We're hoping that there is some relief. In fact, I'm having dinner with the governor later this week, kind of in that vein and in that topic. But
Somebody asked him a hemp question, and he acted like hemp was kryptonite. He said,
well, he said, I'm not educated enough. His space is, he is working in his own space. And he said, that was a space that I didn't know enough about to be proficient in, and I don't want to comment on it because I don't know enough to be proficient. So, you know, it was the responsible educated answer, because he doesn't feel educated enough to make a
yeah. I'd prefer people that don't know what they're talking
Right,
about on
yeah.
the topic
Hey,
to
not
just
my
not
thing.
speak on
Not
it.
my
Exactly.
thing.
You know,
Yes.
good on
staying in
him.
my lane over
right.
here.
Exactly. Yep.
And again, Chicago royalty. I mean, he stuck around. He took pictures. He signed
did.
autographs.
He
told,
did.
you know, and I did not approach him afterwards, but there was a lot of people around. And maybe in a more personal environment, he would tell them.
Right.
Sure.
Again, I just felt like the moment needed a little funny.
You were looking for levity.
I was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I felt like I threw him the ball, and he's like,
He may have been too like
Yeah.
because if it was that heavy in the room, and I know how it can be. Like this, my show often I've heard it described as sometimes people say I'm negative about it. And it's like, no, I just think there's a lot of room to grow, and there are little shortcomings that it has nothing to do with how Illinois is doing it. It's almost like a universal approach. I mentioned possession limits earlier. Purchase limits and possession limits are both just stupid things, just to be blunt about it, because purchase limits are just ridiculous. I should be able to buy as much as I want, but the fact that it's tied to a possession limit, and by exceeding that possession limit, the answer is still the criminal law. Like, that's so silly. And that's basically the case in every state. It really has nothing to do with Illinois, you know?
Yeah.
I just wish we'd be better since we had such a equity focused,
And again,
you
you
know?
hope that with rescheduling, these are the steps that we will begin to see.
Yeah.
There will be, you know, decriminalization efforts and expungement. We expect
Mhm.
a lot of expungement. You know, we hope that there's education and research. You know, it's incremental, but I mean, the recommendation to reschedule it is the first thing that has happened positive in cannabis ever.
Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest thing since the Cole memo, I would say,
Yeah.
because that's what started this adult use approach. So that was the first time the federal government said, like, hey, it's not that we're like changing anything, but if you fall within this framework and you comply with these rules, we're not going to mess with you. This is the first time, like you say, they've ever been like, hey, we're going to change our approach a bit. So
It's getting busy here at Molly's joint.
Yes, it is.
Friday
It
night
is.
here in Tilton.
It is, man. Well, Anything else that we didn't necessarily touch on that you?
I don't think so. This was
We should do this again.
This was a
Good
good
talk.
talk. She's
Yeah.
always nervous about stuff like this, and she's always afraid.
I'm a typical accountant. I'm the introvert.
You seemed
I like
comfortable, so
my-
you seemed super comfortable.
Yeah.
So were you nervous through it, or?
at the onset, but I mean, give me something I know that I am comfortable talking about, and it's
Off
it's
to the
fine,
races.
right? Yeah.
Heather's recently been named to the board of directors of Illinois Women in Cannabis. She is now the treasurer of that organization,
Yeah.
and she laments having to be in that bright of a spotlight, but she's brilliant, and the organization is better having her.
Yeah.
So,
Congrats.
Thanks.
Congrats,
Thanks.
yo.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Well, both of you, I just want to say again, thank you for coming.
thanks for
and-
having us. This has been lots of fun.
Yeah, for folks that want to connect and might need your assistance, if you're in the business, for example, again, those links
It's
are
just
in
vineyard,
the.
vineyardaccounting.net, but look, we're on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the place to go when you're looking for cannabis people. And we've got Instagram. I posted all the pictures that we took up at NECAN in Schaumburg, and
Well, you guys want a couple of joints to take home
I'll
with
take
you?
a couple. Sure.
There you go. One for
Thanks,
each of
man.
you. Yeah,
Appreciate it.
absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, looking forward to the next time we do this. I think it'd be cool to do it here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. This won't be our last visit.
Sweet. Well, folks, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. Looking forward to the next time we do it. So, take care.
Thank you.